What's going on, everybody, and thank you so much for tuning in to yet another year-end top list here on Fulton's Music Reviews. Tonight I'm going to be sharing with you all my top 10 instrumental, jazz, and experimental albums of 2012. And before I begin, you're probably wondering to yourself, Fulton, was there really enough of these kind of releases this year to make a true collective top 10 list? Well, I think you might be surprised to know how much of the stuff I actually listened to, and might be shocked to know how many of these albums actually didn't make the cut. But either way, let's get into this, my top 10 instrumental, jazz, and experimental albums of 2012. And kicking off the list at number 10, we have Jeff Loomis with Plains of Oblivion. Now, to those who don't know Jeff Loomis, he is, of course, the ex-guitarist of the Seattle, Washington-based progressive thrash metal band Nevermore. Now, this is Jeff's second studio album as a solo artist, and it's the follow-up to 2008's Zero Order phase. Now, there's a couple of differences in comparison to his first solo album, and the first one is that this actually is not entirely instrumental, but it is mostly instrumental and mostly enough to be on this list. But there actually is some vocal tracks on this album, as I just said, one of them featuring Ishan from Emperor and also the Ishan solo band, and also a couple of songs with Christina Rhodes on lead vocals, who Nevermore fans may recognize from her background vocals done on Dreaming Neon Black, the Nevermore album. This is a very heavily bassed shred guitar album, something you'd obviously expect if you're a fan of Nevermore and Jeff Loomis, although in comparison to the first solo album, I think that the songwriting definitely sort of declined and decayed a little bit, because there's just so much shred guitar and just so much noodling on this. I just wish that the songwriting was a little bit more cohesive, but still a really solid effort, though. I mean, his guitar playing is fantastic. If you're a fan of Jeff Loomis and a fan of Nevermore, you're just going to love this. There's really no reason for you not to love it. So, knew I had to include it on this list. Number 10, Jeff Loomis, Plains of Oblivion. Moving on to number 9, we have Gene Bodin with Mechanisms. Now, to those who are unfamiliar with Gene Bodin, and I'm sure there might be a lot of you out there, he is an 11-string instrumental ambient bass player from the San Francisco area. And this is his second studio album, and it's the follow-up to 2008's Solace. Now, 11-string bass player, I mean, this is something that I don't think I've ever seen before, and what he's able to do on this instrument is just incredible. Not only is the songcraft and just the playing phenomenal, but the entirety of this new record is comprised of single takes with really no overdubs. There's some occasional looping with some pedals that he uses, but they're all complete single takes with just so much of a hypnotic element. It's just incredible to hear what he's able to accomplish with this instrument. This extremely unique song arrangements, and the fact that it's just all single takes just proves how honest this record is, and it's just something that's going to put you in a trance, and if you're a bass player, you're just going to be absolutely stunned with what he's able to do. So, if you're a fan of ambient music, if you're a fan of a bass player, if you are a bass player, you're just going to be absolutely mind-blown with this, but if you're a fan of all that kind of stuff, instrumental music, definitely check out Gene Bodin and his new album, Mechanisms, number 9. And coming in at number 8, we have American instrumental progressive jazz fusion project Omfrey with their new album, Post Haste. Now, to those who are unfamiliar with this musical collaboration, it is a combination of two musical projects. The first of which being a musical project formed by ex-Megadeth guitarist Chris Poland and Jake Sinninger, Joel Cummins, and Chris Myers of the band Humphreys McGee. Now, this is a very, very interesting musical project, and a project that's very, very heavy on jazz experimentation and sort of improvisational jamming. This is definitely not as experimental as their first album, but definitely a lot heavier than the first album. It's got a little bit more of a song structure to it, even though it is very improvisational and very jam-based. I feel this is more of a project for fans of Humphreys McGee, but it does have more of a metal element on this one, so it might actually appeal to more fans of Chris Poland and fans of Megadeth. As I said, a lot more of a song structure here, so it's not really just like total jazz improvisational chaos, but there's definitely a lot of cool ideas here. Definitely something to check out if you're big on Humphreys McGee instrumentally, as well as some jazz fusion or just really great jam-based progressive rock. So definitely an album to check out. Omfrey with Post Haste, number 8. And moving on to number 7, we have avant-garde guitar master Buckethead with his new album Electric Sea. Now this album is the sequel to his 2002 album Electric Tears, and also shows a return of that more stripped down, clean guitar, more acoustic guitar sound that he's only done kind of a few times in his career, like albums such as Colma, A Diamond in the Rough, and Electric Tears, of course. This album is a little bit different, though. It has a little bit more of a mature sound. It's got some classical reinterpretations on here from composers such as Bach and Catalini, as well as a couple of reworkings of some of his older songs, one of them being Beyond the Knowing, which is a reworking of a song which some may know as What Kind of Nation. And the album also closes with the Michael Jackson tribute track, the Homing Beacon, or the Landing Beacon, however you know it as, which was only available in the past, I believe, only as digital download from his personal website. All in all, this is a very, very relaxing record. If you're a fan of Buckethead's clean playing, you know just what to expect on this. Just great playing, great execution, and the reworkings of What Kind of Nation was great, and just the interpretations of some of these classical pieces were absolutely beautiful to hear. If you're a fan of Buckethead and his clean playing, there's no reason why you shouldn't love this, and something you'll definitely want to check out. Number 7, Buckethead with Electric Sea. Coming in at number 6, we have Brooklyn, New York-based instrumental progressive avant-garde metal band Behold the Octopus with their new album Horror Ascension. Now this was the long-awaited second LP since 2007's Skull Grid, which happens to be one of my favorite albums of all time. And since then, they have a new drummer, but Colin Marston and Mike Lerner still remain on bass and guitar duties. This new LP, though, is more technical and a lot heavier, if you can believe it, but it still contains that dissonant, complex, polyrhythmic style that the band has shown us in the past. It's definitely not as good as Skull Grid, I'll definitely admit that, but it's still Behold the Octopus. I wish this album was a little bit longer, though. It's definitely a lot shorter than Skull Grid as well. But overall, this is a band that is not for everyone. It's definitely a tad bit over the top. I've seen some reviewers give this absolutely horrible, horrible reviews and horrible ratings, but this is an album that you're really going to have to dig deep. It's not for everyone, as I said, but if you want to get into it, you're going to have to try really, really hard. If you're not into this kind of stuff already, you're just going to think this is absolute chaos. It is, but knowing how carefully these songs are written and just how intricate their parts are, it just blows my mind knowing that they're able to recreate each one of these songs perfectly in a live setting. Now, having seen them live myself, I can say that they recreate everything that they do perfectly live, which is just mind-blowing. If you're in for something that's really going to test your limits and your brain on listening to an album, this is one of those albums, but as I said, it definitely doesn't compare to their first LP, Skull Grid. But either way, something to check out if you are a fan of the band, and definitely not a letdown, just not as good. So, number 6, Behold the Octopus with Horror Ascension. Moving on to number 5, we have yet another Brooklyn-based instrumental progressive avant-garde metal band, this time Dysrhythmia with Test of Submission. Now this isn't exactly a coincidence, since it does happen to be another Colin Marston project, but this time he is joined with his fellow guitarist, Kevin Hufnagel. This is definitely a little bit less crazy than Behold the Octopus, but still pretty out there. This is the band's 6th LP, and on this album, they're a little bit more melodic. Their song structure is a little bit more controlled in the songwriting department, but it still has that dissonance and that technicality that you know and love if you are a fan of the band. This, though, I would honestly say is their strongest and most consistent record to date. Just absolutely fantastic playing and energy on this, and it's just, as I said, extremely consistent. I really don't think that they've sounded this good in the past. I've seen them live, and having been a fan of their earlier records, I really think this is one of their best, if not the best. So if you're a fan of Behold the Octopus and want a little bit more of a melodic edge, if you haven't heard of Dysrhythmia, definitely check out this album. Definitely one of their best. Dysrhythmia, Test of Submission. And moving on to number 4, we have instrumental progressive jazz fusion trio, Trioscapes with Separate Realities. And to those who saw my review of this album earlier this year, you will know this is the debut full-length from this project featuring Dan Briggs of Between the Buried and Me on bass. Now, this was just a very, very progressive jazz fusion album with just fantastic use of saxophone and percussion. This band is just so damn tight and just so ridiculous live from having seen them myself. And the bass sounds from Dan Briggs on this album are just insane. And they fit the music really, really well just for how absurd they are. This album also contains a Mahavishnu Orchestra cover, which was just fantastically done. If you're a fan of jazz fusion and you're into lots of progression in your music with lots of quick left turns, you're going to absolutely eat this album up. This is not exactly for fans of Between the Buried and Me, but if you're a fan of Dan Briggs and his bass interludes, especially on a lot of the later Between the Buried and Me albums, you'll absolutely love this album. So definitely an album to check out if you're into jazz fusion. Trioscapes with Separate Realities, number 4. And finally, making it into the top 3, at number 3 we have from Columbus, Ohio, the instrumental progressive rock project Cloudkicker with Fade. Now, if you can remember my review of this album from earlier this year, you'll remember that Cloudkicker is just the one-man project from Mr. Ben Sharp. And this new album is the follow-up to 2011's Let Yourself Be Huge, which was his first time experimenting with more of an acoustic, more mellow, ambient kind of sound. But I think the thing I like most about this new album, Fade, is that it seems to be a combination of the last 2 Cloudkicker albums just sort of blended together. Those 2 albums, of course, being Let Yourself Be Huge and Beacons, with Beacons being the more heavy riff-driven sound that Cloudkicker is pretty much known for. But overall, a very unique combination of sounds for this already unique sounding artist on this album. Just very well done, very well written. The great use of the ambient sounds and the heavy sounds just blend together so well on this. There's terrific variety and terrific flow on this album. And as I said, you can pick all of his albums up for free on his Bandcamp page, and if you're feeling generous enough, you can even throw him a couple bucks. And I definitely suggest doing so, because this is an album and an artist that is definitely worth checking out. And even his back catalog is just as good. So, number 3, Cloudkicker with Fade. And coming in at number 2, we have the Italian guitar virtuoso Steve Vai with The Story of Light. Now, this was the long-awaited follow-up to 2005's Real Illusions Reflections, and as I said in my review of this from earlier this year as well, this could quite possibly be his most mature sounding album to date. Lots of variety and tons of musical diversity found on this album. There's even 2 gospel tracks on this album, which were reworkings of old blues standards called John the Revelator. Now, this album does also contain a few vocal tracks, some vocals done by Steve himself, but the majority of it is primarily instrumental, which was why it was included on this list. But just hearing his playing on this album is just absolutely phenomenal. With his age, his guitar playing ages like a fine wine, and the passion and the emotion in his playing just never seems to go away. In fact, it continues to get even better and just more genuine with each and every release. And this is clearly the work of a true master here on this album. And it might not be his best album, you know, it's definitely not Passion and Warfare Part 2, but either way, it's a absolutely fantastic musical journey, and one to definitely check out if you are a fan of Steve's or a fan of any of the instrumental guitar players like Joe Satriani or anything like that. If you're into musical journeys in instrumental guitar rock, this album is definitely worth checking out. Steve Vai with The Story of Light, number 2. And coming in at number 1, hopefully my voice makes it to the end of this video, we have an album that probably no one would ever expect, and an album that would probably seem to come out of left field for most of you out there. But either way, number 1 is easily, hands down, the best piece of instrumental music I have heard all year. And it is by Louisiana blues guitarist Sonny Landreth with Elemental Journey. Now, to those who are unfamiliar with Sonny Landreth, he is a blues guitarist who is heavy with slide. And I gotta tell you, Elemental Journey is the perfect name for this album. This is just an incredibly beautiful album from start to finish. In every track just seems to tell a story of its own, even though it's instrumentally done, and it just creates this landscapish imagery in your head and just different emotions with each and every passing track. Just such great variety and just such great use of different playing techniques. There's even a good variety of guest musicians on this album as well, featuring Joe Satriani as well as Eric Johnson on some of these tracks. But this is just some of the most impressive slide guitar I've ever heard, especially slide guitar putting it into songwriting and just how it's utilized within a song. He's just able to use and write with the slide with such finesse in a way that I have just never heard before. This is an album full of memorable songs and just brilliant, brilliant melodies. Very, very melodic album, and melodies that are just going to stick in your head for days on end after listening to this album. I will say that this album is definitely not for everyone, but I'm sure that there's definitely at least a song or two on here for everybody. It's got a big twang to it. I mean, it is kind of southern, it is slide guitar after all, but it's incredibly consistent, and just every single song is just different, but just as good as the one before it, and it's just, I can't stop listening to it, and it's my number one for a very good reason. Yeah, so if you're interested in checking out some heavily melodic blues guitar with slide in a very unique and creative way, Sonny Landreth, Elemental Journey is definitely the album to check out here in 2012. And before I completely can't talk anymore, I'm just going to end it there, and I hope to have a voice for the next top list video. So until then, I will see you next time, and definitely check out some of these albums if you haven't already. Bye-bye.